everyone to arrive. Who here has heard of the ASVS before? Stick your hand up if you've heard of the ASVS. Just let people drip in. Okay, so who's heard of the ASVS? Put hands up. Put your hands up. Keep your hands up if you've heard of the ASVS. Okay, good. So we'll cover what is the ASVS beforehand. So that's good. For those who've heard of the ASVS, who's using it actively today? Okay, so one at the back, and hopefully maybe more after this session. So, okay, I'm going to get started properly. So, I'm going to cover a few things today, including what is the ASVS, a little bit about the version that's coming up, version 5, and then how you can get involved, and a quick demo of sort of how to use it, because it's quite a big thing, as we'll see, quite a large document. So before we get into that, let's see if my clicker will work. Click. All right, so who am I? So my name's Josh Grossman. I work as an application security consultant, work with organizations, helping them build their software securely, work for a company called Bounce Security. I work on various different clients, working with developers, building processes, helping them with day-to-day software security tasks. I also do training, I do talks about ASVS and other things as well, do trainings about security tools and various other software security topics. In my spare time, my hobby is I'm quite involved with OWASP, as Ron mentioned earlier on, the Open Worldwide Application Security Project. I'm one of the chapter leads for the Israel chapter, so feel free to look that out afterwards, because there's definitely a big chapter of OWASP here in Israel, a lot of people involved in OWASP here in Israel. And I'm also a co-leader of the ASVS project, the Application Security Verification Standard. And yeah, like I said, that's what I want to talk to you for a few minutes about today. So like I say, what is the ASVS? For those of you who aren't already familiar with it, some of the key principles behind version 5, how you can get involved, how you can help out with the project. OWASP, the O in OWASP stands for open, and the idea is that we want everyone to be involved. We want a wide variety of different perspectives on the project in OWASP. And finally, I'm going to do a quick demo, which uses AI, as is everything else nowadays. Everything has to include AI somewhere, so this demo will use AI. And I'll show you a demo of how we can use the ASVS in sort of a real-life developer situation. So what is the ASVS? So the ASVS is a project designed to help build software security. It's designed to give a set of requirements for, here are the requirements, here are the properties that we expect that a secure piece of software, a secure application is going to have. So it's designed to be a standard. It's not, if anyone's heard of the OWASP top 10, the OWASP top 10 is just sort of like 10 bad things that could happen to your application. Some of those things are one thing, some of those things are lots of things. The ASVS is a lot more sort of organized and structured in a way, okay, here are the requirements you need in this particular area. Here are the requirements you need in that particular area. Here are the requirements you need for authentication. Here are the requirements you need for session management. Here are the requirements you need for cryptography. The idea is to provide something you can look at and say, okay, well, how am I doing according to these requirements? Which of these requirements am I complying with? Which of these requirements am I not yet complying with? It's developed very much out in the open. We base off a GitHub repository. All the discussions on new requirements or changes to requirements happen in GitHub issues. We open pull requests to make changes. The idea is that anyone can be involved, anyone can provide feedback, anyone can provide input, anyone can ask questions. We don't just want to sit in a room and come out with a new version. We want as many eyes as possible on updates on newer versions.
Is there a certification?
There is not a certification. There are organizations that sort of base on ASVS to perform certain assessments, but there's no formal certification.
So it's more like a checklist, a set of rules?
Well, let's see what it looks like. And broadly speaking, it could be considered a checklist. You can use it as a checklist for verification. You can use it as a checklist for a developer. You can use it as sort of a reference point to say, okay, we need to address this particular requirement. The idea is to try and have individual items that each item is sort of small enough and self-contained enough that you can deal with that item by itself. You don't have a long list of things you have to deal with to comply with one particular item. So here we've got an extract from ASVS. This is chapter 12, which is called Files and Resources. Here we've got the overall objective of the chapter, the sort of risks we're trying to address with this chapter. We then have the first section of this chapter, section 12.1, which is around file upload, bit of commentary about that section, and then we go into the individual requirements, 12.1.1, 12.1.2, 12.1.3. Each one trying to say, okay, this is a particular property of the application. This is something the application should do positively to protect against a particular attack. And we always like to try and make these requirements positive. We like to say, we don't just want to say, don't do this, don't do that, don't do the other. We want to say, you do want to do this. Make sure, okay, you made a clown out of me already because the first one is a little bit negative. It says, will not accept large files. Potentially reword that to say that verified application has a limit on the size of files that it will accept. Verify the application checks compressed files to make sure they're not going to decompress to something very, very large. So again, the idea is to have a set of requirements, a set of properties for each one of those, for each area of security.
So if I would like to implement these standards and my application required as part of its workflow to upload, speaking as Artifactory core person, it's okay that I will upload very, very large files, so I can neglect that.
Yeah, so I'll mention on the next slide actually, but in general you have to think about, okay, how does this work for my organization? This is a generic basis by its very definition. It's designed to be as widely applicable as possible. You are going to have to look at it and say, well, what makes sense in my situation? What adjustments do I have to make for my particular situation? One thing I want to highlight is the levels. There are a lot of ASVS requirements. Version 4, which is the most recent stable version, had somewhere around 260. Version 5 looks like it's going to have even more than that. Obviously, that's a lot of things to do in one go. We don't want people doing that in one go. So the idea is to say, okay, well, these are the requirements you need at level 1. These are the requirements you want to start with. So here we can see in this example, we've got one level 1 requirement. The first one is a level 1 requirement. The next two are considered level 2 requirements. We say, okay, you'll start off with that. Let's try and handle all the level 1 requirements first, and then move on to level 2 and then to level 3. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we've shifted our thinking around that for version 5. So like I say, you can use it for various different things. You can use it for building an application. You can use it as a set of requirements you want to consider whilst you're in the building stages. You can use it for verifying an application. If you're doing quality assurance or you just want to consider the security of your application and assess the security of your application, you can use this as a benchmark to say, okay, well, these are the sort of things I should be doing. Am I doing this? And go use it as a set of tasks to look at, a set of qualities, a set of properties we want to see in the application. You can also use it for assessing security of vendors. If you're bringing in third-party software, third-party products, if they can communicate to you the level of security of their application, of their software, based on something like ASVS, that makes it a lot easier to understand, okay, well, how is this vendor, how is this third party going to affect the security of my environment, of my piece of software, and where might there be weaknesses, where I need to put in mitigations. One of our co-leaders is head of cybersecurity research for Banco Santander. He's very involved in the sort of suppliers they bring in, the third parties they bring in. He wants to see that they have some level of compliance with some sort of security standards such as ASVS before he's running their software in his environment. So there's a lot more to say about what the ASVS is. I've got some longer talks where I dig into detail about ASVS 4, and another talk where I go into more practicalities of, okay, well, how can we use this in an organization, sort of step-by-step thinking about how do we take this very, very large standard and how do we apply it within an organization. So if those things are interesting to you, feel free to check out those talks. Yeah, today I can't talk about everything. I'm a little bit time restricted. So I wanted to give a quick overview, and then we'll move on to talking about version 5. Drink some water. So version 5. It's been a while since version 4 was released. The most sort of recent stable version was back in 2021. So the time is overdue for a newer version. Things have changed since then. Technology has moved on. We've also seen a slight shift in the way we see the scope of ASVS. And therefore, we're very close to releasing version 5. We're expecting in the next few months we'll have that out. Now, the overall goal for ASVS version 5 is something quite simple. Make it easier to use. There's a lot going on with ASVS, so a lot of requirements. The barrier to entry is quite high. I talked about level 1 being where you start, the requirements that you start with. ASVS 4, level 1 has 130 requirements or something. That's a very big first step to comply with what level 4 describes as the minimum level. So we're making various changes in version 5 and sort of various, I guess, philosophical approaches to try and make it easier to use. So the first is just to generally go through the requirements, improve the wording, make them slightly more focused. In version 4, there are some that are a little bit out of scope. They're more like processes rather than properties of software. There are some that are out of control of the developers. We want to make sure we're focused on the scope of securing a web application. We also want to make sure we balance between the right amount of detail, having enough detail so it's clear what the requirement is saying, but not so much detail that the requirement is suddenly a page long and very hard to parse, very hard to apply. So that sort of almost goes, when we release a new version, we want to improve the overall content of the new version. We also want to improve the level structure. So like I say, in version 4, level 1 had a lot of requirements. We want to bring that down to something like 50 or 60 requirements. Now, that's still quite a lot to do, but it's already a lot more achievable. It makes it a lot easier to get on that first rung of the ladder, to start off and say, okay, we've achieved a level of ASVS, we've achieved a certain level of security, and that now gives us a springboard to say, okay, how can we move on to the following levels? Along with that, we want to balance out levels 2 and 3. In ASVS 4, level 2 had another 130 requirements, and level 3, I think, had 20 or 30, but they were a little bit more complicated. And we want to balance out those level 2 and level 3, so it's a slightly more linear progression, slightly easier sort of overall journey to improving security. We also want to redefine a little bit the way we talk about the levels. So in version 4, we refer to level 1 as the minimum level. So you do 130 requirements, you do all this work, and you'd be like, yeah, now you're at the minimum level, but you're not at the standard level. The standard level is going to be another 130 requirements. And it didn't feel like a big morale booster. It didn't feel like a very encouraging way of looking at security. So we want to sort of focus the levels more around, okay, the level of maturity of the product, the level of maturity of your security function. So if you've got a brand new startup who are just getting started, it makes sense they'd be at level 1. They're doing the requirements to get them the biggest bang for buck. They're getting the entry-level requirements. But if you have a bank with one of its core online banking systems, and they're saying, no, we can't comply with level 3, you might start asking questions. You might start saying, well, this isn't the application you developed yesterday. This isn't a low impact application. This is a pretty high impact application. You're not a startup, you're a bank. You have the resources. That'd be the expectation you'd have that level of maturity to get up to level 3. So whereas previously we sort of used these very sort of judgmental names, minimum level for level 1, standard level for level 2, and advanced level for level 3, we're now seeing it more as like a maturity level. So what do you as the application owner want to promote the security, or how do you want to promote the security of your application? How do you want to present the security of your application? Are you presenting yourself as a level 1 organization or as a level 3 organization? Are you just starting out, you relatively early on, you lower maturity, or are you an organization that wants to promote a higher level of security, a higher maturity for security? And leave it to that sort of self-labeling almost in terms of which level organizations think they need to be at. We also want to make the document cleaner. The original version 4 document had about 4 or 5 different introductory sections. Must have been about 10 pages of text before you actually get to requirements. One of the things that I saw as a slightly different perspective, but Google has the minimum viable security requirements. I can't remember exactly the acronym. But that's like Google's perspective on, here's some basic security requirements for a cloud app or something. And with them, it's about 3 lines of text and you've already got requirements. We're not going to quite go to that extreme, but we want to make it a lot easier to get to the requirements and a lot easier to parse the requirements. On that page that we saw earlier, there were quite a few different columns, there were some mappings, there was a lot of extra text. We want to make it a little bit more focused on, here's the text you absolutely need to read, here are the requirements, here's the bare minimum of columns we need. In terms of mappings and mapping ASVS to other standards and to other OWASP resources, for those of you who aren't familiar, OWASP has lots and lots of different projects, including some very, very sophisticated ones, such as the OWASP Cheat Sheets project, which has detailed guidance on lots of different security problems and how to fix them, how to address them. So there's one project called the CRE, the Common Requirements Enumeration. And the idea of this project is they want to link between all the other projects. They want to say, okay, we've got this ID, and this ID links to this item in this project, and this item in that project. And the idea being, once you have mapped to a CRE, you then figure out, okay, well, what other guidance can I pull from OWASP resources based on the mapping to CRE? So instead of whatever mappings we've got at the moment, we want to move to CRE mappings, and that lets us chain through to a variety of other resources that OWASP provides. So those are the key ideas. The idea to push it in the direction of how do we make this easier to use? How do we make it more approachable? So how can you help? How can you be involved? I said that OWASP is an open organization. We want everyone to be involved. And the first thing is to join the community. We're sort of doing more work nowadays, not just talking about security requirements, but talking to people, trying to build community. We did a community day in Lisbon back at OWASP conference in 2023. We want to try and build a community overall. At the end, I'll give links to sort of follow OWASP on the ASVS on social media, how to keep up to date with what's going on. We want to really expand the community, also expand the pool of volunteers. Now, I'll talk in a second about contributing to the standard, but there are a lot of other jobs that we're looking for assistance with as well. This project is sort of its own mini entity that needs marketing, that needs website, that needs someone to maintain the GitHub actions, so I don't get stuck doing it every time. So lots of different roles we look for in the project, and the more we can expand the pool of people involved, the easier it gets to progress and to promote the project. If working on security requirements is your jam, is something that you're interested in, or you've previously used ASVS and you have feedback or you've got ideas, we certainly welcome guidance on the requirements in ASVS, the sections in ASVS. We're currently, like I say, coming towards the end of version 5, so now is very much the time. We're getting to the point where we're going to finalize the requirements, rearrange them, and take sort of limited public feedback. So if you've got feedback on the requirements or you want to have a look through, definitely now's the time to go and take a look and have a think about, do these requirements make sense? Are these requirements understandable? Is there something that I'm missing here? So yeah, do feel free to be involved in that way.
In what way do people contribute to you? Like, I don't understand. You just leave rules in order them in different importance?
So it could be you think that the level 1 requirement should be level 3. It could be level 3. You think level 3 requirement should be level 1. It could be that you think the text of a requirement is confusing. It's not clear. Okay, what does this requirement actually mean? What's this requirement talking about? Or maybe there's a piece of terminology in the requirement that's not clear and you think needs to be explained somewhere. So there are all sorts of different possibilities there. Ultimately, we want to make it as understandable as possible. We want to make it as sort of widely accessible as possible, whilst also accepting it is a technical standard and it is going to need someone with some sort of software or development or security experience to be able to interpret it. But the idea is it shouldn't just be people with a very strong security background who understand it, but we very much want to pitch it so that developers can pick it up and use it as well, and use it in their day-to-day work.
When will be this officially released?
We don't have an official release date, but I'd expect in the next few months. Like now is the time we're trying to whack-a-mole on the open issues so that we can prepare a release candidate.
If you would look like at the requirement level, not mapping into level 1 to 3, like what is the difference? What changed between 1 and 5?
A lot. There are a lot of requirements that we decided, okay, this requirement isn't in scope for ASVS. There was requirements about backups that we felt, well, that's not really at the code level. That's something operational that someone else is dealing with. There are requirements around threat modeling and other SSDLC processes where we're like, well, that's important, but it's not a property of the application. It's not a requirement of the application. It's a process thing which there are other projects to handle. There are certain requirements where we looked at one requirement, we looked at another requirement, we said, well, that's kind of saying the same thing, so we've merged them together. There are new sections around OAuth. We've split out requirements around cryptographic tokens. I can't remember the exact name we came down on that in the end, but we see one of the things we see constantly in applications is challenges around how we use things like JWTs and signed tokens. So we've got a section specifically dedicated to that. We've got a new section around WebRTC, which is a little bit niche. If you're using WebRTC, it'll be relevant. If you're not using WebRTC, it won't be relevant. But sort of a wide variety of additional content, and also just improving the content. There are some requirements where I'd read the requirement in version 4, I'd be like, I don't understand what that means. Like, I was involved in the release of version 4, but I'm not 100% sure what that means. So we're really trying to do a very, one of the reasons it's taking time is because we really want it to be sort of a root to branch revamp of the requirements that are in version 4.
Like we're building up our SDLC process. So would you suggest to wait with it, with like till version 5 of the release, or like introduce version 4, like just like start the review and then upgrade to version 5? Like how would you?
Good question. So one of the things we're working on is making sure that we've got a mapping between version 4 and version 5. So that should make it easier if you start with version 4 to then move on to version 5 afterwards. I've got time limited here, so I want to make sure I finish the Imbar gets to go as well. So happy to answer questions afterwards as well. Like I say, I'll put my contact details up at the end. We can talk through it more. The other thing I did want to mention is that you can also support the standard directly if your organization is interested in ASVS or using ASVS or wants to push it along, or wants preference given to its questions and its issues. You can provide funding as well. One of the things we use funding for is to get the team together. Back in November, we got the leadership to get the team together in person for the first time and crashed through a whole load of work that had been sort of dragging on over several months. We all got together face to face and just got a load of work done. That's something that's really effective sort of for moving things along and progressing the project and generally accelerating the release. And thanks to JIT, who are one of the supporters of ASVS. So that's the ASVS, but how can we use it? As I've said, the ASVS is big. We're talking about something between 250, 350 requirements. Now, the previous talk I mentioned does talk a little bit about how to do that manually, but a couple of people from a company called Neo4j came up with a nice thing that I just want to do a quick demo of to finish off here. So the idea is, if you're a developer or you're working in a development organization, you're not going to look through 350 requirements every time you want to release a new feature. You're probably not going to look through 100 requirements every time you want to release a new feature. You need to be able to focus, okay, which requirements are going to be relevant to me at this point in time? Which requirements are relevant to me for this feature? So enter AI and enter Irene and Alex from Neo4j. So they came up with a mechanism to try and focus that without making up requirements as you go along. So they took the ASVS. The ASVS, like I say, is structured into chapters and sections and requirements. And Neo4j is a graph database company, so they thought it looks quite graphy. We start off with the top level of the ASVS, and then we've got the chapters, say authentication or session management, and then within each chapter we've got sections, password security, credential recovery, and then within each one of those sections we've then got the requirements themselves, and that sort of forms this nice little sort of tree graph thing. So they took that and they stored it into one of their graph databases. And then they applied embeddings for those requirements. So what is an embedding? I've not got time to go into all the highly technical details, so I'll use the bit that I understand, which is that embeddings are a bunch of numbers that are used in machine learning to help compare between two different sets of data. It's obviously a lot more complicated than that, but that's the overall idea. We can use a set of numbers for this set of data, a set of numbers for this set of data, and we can use those to compare and say, well, how similar are they? So ChatGPT gave me those embeddings for a cat and those embeddings for a dog. So they then went and calculated embeddings for all the ASVS requirements. They then write a prompt. They then say, this is the feature that I'm developing. This is a description of the feature that I'm developing. They use an LLM to generate the embeddings for that prompt, for that feature, for that description they've written out. They search their graph for those embeddings. They say, okay, well, these are the embeddings of the prompt or the feature. These are the embeddings of ASVS, which ASVS requirements seem similar. And then they send them over to an LLM and say, look, this is your corpus of requirements. This is the requirements that are most similar to this feature. Based on these requirements, so that you're not going to hallucinate requirements, so we don't have to teach you all the ASVS. Based on these requirements, describe what we need to do to in order to to secure this feature. What do we need to think about when we're securing this feature? So the idea is we avoid hallucinations. We use, Ron mentioned briefly earlier, retrieval augmented generation. The idea is we're giving it a set of data to look at, and then how to letting only focus on that data. It's not going to make up data. It's not going to bring in data that's made up. So we'll do a quick demo. I'm going to have to go here, aren't I? All right. Does not want to come out. All right. So this is my prompt. I'm going to just use one feature for now. So I can give it a feature, paste it into the place where I put in the prompt. It's going to think about it. I started this earlier, so I hope it's going to work. There we go. So these are the requirements that came back with from the graph database. So it came back with the requirements that seem most similar. So this feature is about sending messages between users, and it might include formatted text. So it's come up with requirements around, I mentioned email as well, so it's come up with a requirement about email standardization. It's come up with requirements about communications between different services. It's come up with requirements about sanitizing potentially dangerous inputs. And then it comes up with the actual response to the LLM, which has taken those requirements and then built a response in the format that I asked it to provide. So I said, give me relevance, implementation, suggested QA, and we can then give that, either let developers use that as self-service or provide that to developers, and the idea is we give it to them in a way that they're going to expect.
You run it locally, isn't it available on the web?
The code is available on the web. The code, I put the link to the code, I think was on those slides. I'm just running it locally here, but it's not something that they're publicly making available, because I think the idea is you take the code, you run it yourself, you put in your open API key, and you run it yourself. I'm gonna finish off because I know a little bit time compressed here, but that's the overall idea. We've got this way of saying, okay, well, how do we take all these features, all these requirements, and how do we just focus on the ones that are important to us? And the benefits, obviously, we get a more accurate subset. We get ones that are focused to our needs. We don't have hallucinations. We get output in the format that we expect and in the format that our developers need. It's scalable because it's an LLM. It's not relying on human intervention as such, so it can potentially scale across a large number of developers. The challenges are that embeddings are hard. The calculation of those numbers is hard. I tried to fiddle around with it a little bit. It got complicated. So there is going to need to be some refinement to make that work effectively. You still need to consider, okay, what's important for your organization. So in summary, stay tuned for version 5. Use the contact details if you want to keep track, or you follow the social media. Support the standard with your time, with your funding. Speak to me if you're interested in that. And hopefully you can find ways to focus your use of ASVS and use it more effectively. These are my contact details. Thanks very much for your time. I appreciate it.